Hello and welcome to English Digest. I'm Seb.
I'm Elsie.
Today we are actually going to be talking a bit about education and studying abroad. So let's take a look at our first sentence. An increasing number of students are choosing to study abroad to get a better education. Okay, I'm assuming we're talking about students in Taiwan here, because I know that there's a lot of students going abroad. In fact, just in the 3 years that I've been in Taiwan, I can't count the number of Taiwanese friends I've had who have gone to Europe, to America, to Australia to go and study in foreign universities. And all ages, not just 18, but 18, 25, 30 people go around the world. And it's actually very, very popular in Taiwan. I actually looked up the number of Taiwanese students who are studying abroad at the moment. Do you know exactly how many Taiwanese students are going to college abroad at the moment?
I don't know. How many?
Well, it's actually 71,488, according to the statistics. According to Statistica, that's a website with lots of data.
Wow, 所以71,488个人 they're studying abroad now.
Yes, and I think this is just before COVID happened. But I know that a lot of people are going abroad to study again now that the pandemic is a bit less serious in Europe and America than it was in 2020. So the same data actually showed that English-speaking countries were the top destinations. So the first place was obviously the United States, and the second most popular choice was Australia. Nice. Anyway, let's get back to our translation exercise. How can we translate that into Chinese, Elsie?
这一句我们要翻译的句子中文是越来越多的学生选择出国留学以接受更好的教育。
Got it. So study abroad must be 留学.
Right.
Then, I know in Chinese you can say 留学生 to mean someone who studies in a country that is not their own, an international student. That's what we'd call them in English, actually, an international student. We can't call them study abroad students. So basically, international student is basically like 国际学生。
没错，国际学生。然后呢students who study abroad, 我们会叫他留学生。OK, 再来我们的时态，要用的是现在进行式，描述正在发生的事情哦。因为我们说现在有越来越多的学生选择做这件事情。那越来越多，除了最常见的 more and more 之外，我们也可以用 an increasing 或是 a growing 或者是 a rising number of something 来表示。那如果要表达越来越少，我们可以用 on the decrease. So for example, a growing number of people are choosing to grow their own food at home. 代表有越来越多的人选择在家里面种植自己的食物。
I like that you pointed out that phrase on the decrease. The opposite of this would be on the rise, which means increasing or going up. So if we wanted to rewrite our translation sentence using that phrase, it would look a little something like this. The number of students that are choosing to study abroad to get a better education is on the rise. Notice how on the rise and on the decrease follow to be. We can't attach them directly to a noun like a regular adjective.
OK, 再来呢，我们要讲到的是选择、挑选。当然你可以用 choose 这个字，好，那我们不要用 select 或是 pick， 因为这三个字的字义其实不太一样哦。如果你用的是 choose， 它指的是依客观的条件来选出最合适的，通常是在两者之间做选择，或者是深思熟虑之后所做的选择，像是选择就读的学校、职业等等，好，我们都会用 choose 这个字来说。那 select 表示是在众多的选择当中淘汰不合适的，有精挑细选的含义。那 pick 则是表示任意挑选，所以呢，本句我们选择出国留学是在两件事情当中做抉择，也就是要在台湾读书还是出国读书，所以呢，我们用的是 choose 这个字。那这边呢，给同学们一个 pick 的例句来参考哦。For example, at this restaurant, you can pick one of the 3 options for each course. 在这间餐厅呢，你可以从3样菜当中选一个当做主菜。OK, 再来呢，留学的部分我们可以用 study abroad 或是 study overseas 来说。那接受教育呢，可以用 get 或是 receive an education。 本句呢，文意表示受到、获得教育，所以我们用 get 或是 receive 来表示接受。那如果你用的是 accept， 你要小心哦，它指的是同意或主动、自愿的接受，如接受邀请或是道歉等等。好，所以跟我们这边要表达的不太一样，所以这边不能用 accept。好，那 accept 的例句给一个让同学们参考哦。Please accept this invitation to attend our wedding. We'd love to see you there. 请你接受这份邀请函以参加我们的婚礼，我们很想在那边见到你。
The sentence 2 of our translation goes into a little bit more detail on it. So let's look at sentence 2 now. No matter which country you are going to study in, being able to speak English can help you break the language barrier and make more friends. Right, okay, we've been talking a lot about making friends with international students, right? When you were in Boston, you made a lot of international friends. And here in Taiwan, I've made a lot of international friends. And one of those reasons is that English is definitely the lingua franca of the world.
Lingua franca 代表的是通用语吗？ Like we all use English.Basically,
it's a Latin word that means common tongue. So actually, if you translated it literally into Chinese, I think it would actually be 普通话.
普通话.
But it's actually, that has a different meaning in Chinese. But basically, it means a language that lots of people can speak in a place, but it's not their native language. Okay, so again, let me repeat the sentence because we've been talking so much about this word. No matter which country you are going to study in, being able to speak English can help you break the language barrier and make more friends. So how are we going to translate this?
Okay, 这一句话呢，中文是无论你要去哪个国家留学，会说英文能帮你打破语言隔阂，交到更多的朋友。那这个时态呢，我们要用的是现在简单式。描述事实。那当我们要表示不论、无论的时候，可以用 no matter。句型是呢 ，no matter who 或是 whom, what, which, where, when 或是 how， 加上子句之后，逗号标上去，再接上主词跟动词，表示无论谁、什么、哪一个、在哪里、何时、如何。那 no matter也可以改写为复合关系代名词哦，也就是用 no matter 加上一个 WH 疑问词。那像是我们可以把它变成 whoever, whomever, whatever, whichever, wherever, whenever 或是 however. So for example, I'm not selling you my dog, no matter how many times you ask. 不论你问多少次，我都不会卖你我的狗。
No matter is a very handy phrase. Another way of saying it, though, is regardless. Regardless and no matter mean the same thing, and we almost use them in the same way. Normally, though, if you're using regardless in place of no matter, we need to follow it with the preposition of. So in that example sentence Elsie just said, we could say, I'm not selling you my dog regardless of how often you ask, or regardless of how many times you ask. We can use regardless as a sentence adverb as well. In this case, it means something more like still or anyway. So for example, it looks like it might rain soon. Regardless, I'm going out for a walk.
OK, 所以 regardless 或是 regardless of 可以代表的是无论如何。好，那再来呢，我们要注意啊，翻译的时候呢，我们很容易会把介系词忘记，所以在前半句当中 country 搭配的介系词是 in， 因为 you study in the country， 所以在翻译的时候呢，也要记得把 in 给翻出来哦。那再来，当我们要表达会或是能够的时候，可以用 be able to，也就是有怎么样的能力。那本句的会说英文是主词，所以 be 要变成动名词 being， 你才可以放在主词里头，对吗？ For example, Aria is able to make a good living as a freelance news writer. Aria 这个人呢，他能够以自由新闻作家维持良好的生计。
I wish Aria would tell me her secret. It's very difficult to make a living as a freelance news writer sometimes. Right. Okay, well, we could also say that because Aria is so talented and she has so many tricks, that she is capable of making a good living as a freelance news writer. Capable is similar to able, but not the same. When we say that someone is capable of doing something, we mean they could do it if they wanted to, or if they tried very hard. So normally, capable means something that someone could do, not what they are doing right now. Here's 2 example sentences to illustrate the difference. James is able to get very good grades in school. James is capable of getting very good grades in school. So here, when we're talking about James being able to get good grades in school, we're saying that he gets good grades. He gets A's and A stars and A pluses. He's very talented. In sentence B, James's grades aren't very good. We're saying that he's clever, but maybe he's not trying hard enough, or maybe he's got some problems and they're stopping him from reaching his full potential. He could get good grades, but he hasn't got them yet. He's capable of getting good grades, but he needs to make some changes to actually get those grades. All right, we've also got this very handy phrase, language barrier, which is something which I'm always struggling with here in Taiwan. So why don't we take a closer look at this one?
Sure. Language barrier 它代表的是语言隔阂，因为呢 barrier 这个名词可以用来表示有形或无形的障碍物。那常见的搭配词还有像是 cultural barrier 文化的隔阂， age barrier 年龄的隔阂。那如果你要打破隔阂，我们可以用动词 break， 它有表示结束或是终结的意思。那常用的搭配词像是 break the silence 打破沉默， break the record 打破记录， break the deadlock 打破僵局。So for example, the couple struggled to overcome their cultural barriers and understand each other's point of view. 这对情侣努力克服他们的文化隔阂，并且理解彼此的观点。
Right, we could also talk about culture shock. Culture shock is when someone goes to a foreign country or enters a new cultural group and finds things are very different to their way of life. We could call it 文化冲突. So, for example, a friend of mine from New Zealand moved to rural India when she was 28 and she had never lived abroad before. So, as you can imagine, there were a lot of culture shocks there. People did things very differently from her home in New Zealand. All right, let's take a quick break, and when we're back, we will look at our second translation. Okay, let's move on to our second translation, and we're talking about a very different topic here. Our second sentence, or our first sentence of the second translation, is thousands of citizens fled Afghanistan as the Taliban seized control of the country. Right, this was a very important news story this summer, and I'm sure you've all heard something about it. An organization called the Taliban took over the government of Afghanistan after a war. Now, I'm not sure how much we can get into this because it's a big, complicated topic. But basically, the war in Afghanistan is a very complicated topic. It's a conflict that happened from 2001 until 2021, during which several countries, including the UK and the US, fought in Afghanistan to kick a group called the Taliban out of the country. The war was very controversial, though, and a lot of people weren't happy that countries like the UK and the US were going into other countries and trying to control how things were happening. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's quite a difficult topic to talk about. So we'll focus more on the language here. And basically, but all you need to know is basically right now the Taliban are in control. They've won the war. So we lost it, basically.
OK, 所以简单来说呢，塔利班和基地组织是当地人为了抵抗苏联入侵，在1980年代末期建立的组织哦。那美国和西方阵营是他们主要的敌人。他们在2001年发动911攻击，那现在呢，他们接管阿富汗，人民都感到相当的害怕。所以我们这句话的中文要翻译的中文是成千上万的居民逃离阿富汗，因为塔利班夺取了对该国的控制权。
So yeah, there was a lot of chaos in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over because people were very worried about what the country would be like under their government. They are known as being quite a strict group that controls and doesn't give people a lot of human rights. And so there was chaos in Afghanistan when this happened. And that's what brings us to this scene of thousands of people fleeing the country that we have in our translation sentence.
没错，那时态注意哦，我们要用的是过去式，描述过去发生的事情。成千上万的、数以千计的，我们可以用 thousands of 来表示。那如果是数以万计的，我们就再加上 ten， 好，所以会变成 tens of thousands of. So for example, the band came out on stage to the screams of thousands of excited fans, 代表这支乐队在成千上万兴奋歌迷的尖叫声当中登台。
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned the past tense there, because actually when we're writing news, and you guys can remember this, it will save you a lot of time. When you're writing about any kind of news, the normal thing to do in English is to write in the past simple tense. So we can see there was a lot of chaos when the Taliban took over. We're not using the present perfect. We're not using the past perfect. We use the past simple because we're talking about previous events. And yes, we're talking about thousands of people being at the airport, lots and lots of people. Now, thousands of is just one way, or crowds of, as you pointed out, are just ways that we can talk about big groups of people. We could also talk about them in other ways. We could talk about streams of people, streams of excited fans in a concert, for example. And that basically, stream, as you know, is like a river. It's a lot of water moving in one way. So when we talk about streams of people, we're talking about a crowd of people all moving in the same direction or rushing in one direction. So we could use that as well. Perhaps not for the sentence that we're talking about now, but we could use it for some other contexts.
OK， 再来呢，我们要表示因为既然的时候啊，可以用连接词 as、because 或是 since， 然后后面再接一个完整的子句。So for example, since we're both writing about the same topic, why don't we work together? 既然我们都是在写同一个题目，我们何不一起做呢？那再来，当我们要表达的是夺取点点点的控制权的时候，我们可以用 seize 这个动词 ，seize control of， 好，可以表达这样的意思。那 seize 它是夺取攻占。So, for example, the army had to flee after enemy troops seized control of the island. 代表在敌军夺取这座岛屿的控制权之后，军队不得不逃离开来。
Exactly, right. This is really the key word of the sentence, seize. When we seize something, we take it by force. Using the word seize here suggests that the Taliban fought to take control of the country. So it's not saying that the people of Afghanistan were trying to get the Taliban to be in control. They fought a war and they took over the country, okay? We don't necessarily just need to use it in this context. We could use it in any kind of war. Or we could use it in other situations too. So let's say that one company suddenly buys control of another company without really considering the feelings of anybody who works there. We could say that that company seized control of the other one. Or we could say that the government seized control of a rich person's house when they found out he hadn't paid any taxes. They took his house away from him. So those are some ways that we can use seize. Now, let's move on to the second sentence, and this will give us a little bit more description of some of the implications or some of the effects of this conflict. And it looks like it's focusing on the international situation. The sentence 2 reads, "This posed a dilemma for neighboring countries, who were worried about whether this would result in a new wave of refugees." Okay, well, actually, there's a lot of consequences I think we can talk about with the Taliban coming to power. As I said, the Afghanistan war is a very complicated topic, but some of the really pressing issues that we need to think about now include the quality of life or the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, because the new government, it appears, is putting a lot of restrictions on what they can do. So, for example, I think right now, women, or at the time that we're recording this, women aren't allowed to go into Afghan universities, and a lot of women have been removed from the government as well.
所以妇女没有办法受教育，然后没有办法受到公平的对待，这是现在大家很关注的议题。那这一句呢，我们要翻译的中文是：这让邻国陷入两难。他们担心呢，这是不是会导致新一波的难民潮？那陷入两难呢，我们可以用 pose a dilemma 来说。那 dilemma 表示困境或是进退两难的状况。搭配的动词呢，我们要用 pose P-O-S-E， 它有造成或是引起问题或困难的意思。So for example, my mom and my wife aren't getting along, and it's posing a dilemma for me. 我妈妈和我妻子不太合得来，这让我陷入两难的状况。
Right. So when we're talking about dilemmas, we're normally talking, or dilemmas. So you can say dilemma or dilemma. When we're talking about dilemmas, we're often talking about very difficult decisions or things which don't have easy choices. And that reminds me of two expressions that we have in English for this exact kind of situation. So one is a Sophie's choice. And a Sophie's choice is basically an extremely difficult decision with no positive outcome. So it actually comes from a movie called Sophie's Choice. Well, a book and a movie called Sophie's Choice, where a woman in World War II has to choose which one of her two children to save from a concentration camp. So it's obviously that would be a very, very difficult decision to make. How could you choose to save one of your children but not the other one? And for that reason, we use this in English to mean something which has no good outcome. You're always going to have a bad outcome. So, for example, voters in this election have a real Sophie's choice between one candidate who wants to close public hospitals and another who doesn't believe in global warming. So both of these candidates sound like they have very bad political positions, but the people have to choose one of them. And so we would call that a Sophie's choice. Another one we could use is a catch-22. And a catch-22 is a choice that has negative outcomes no matter what course of action is taken. So, for example, let's say you've lied to a friend, and in order to keep up that lie, you're going to make things worse, okay? But if you tell the friend that you've lied to them, then that you're going to hurt their feelings a lot. We could call that a catch-22. So with a catch-22, it doesn't have to be that both things are equally bad. They have to be just both bad. Okay, so you're going to hurt someone's feelings or you're going to make things more complicated. That's a catch-22. So what's happening in today's sentence, though, I don't really think is a Sophie's choice or a catch-22 because accepting refugees personally, I don't think is a negative outcome. I think that there's some challenges with it, but I don't think there's anything bad about helping people find asylum, finding a safe place to stay.
True. 那接下来呢，我们还要表示，这让邻国陷入两难。邻国该怎么说呢？邻近的、相邻的，我们可以用 neighboring 或是 nearby。所以呢，我们可以说 There's a famous festival being held in a neighboring town. Should we go? 那就代表呢，在邻近的城镇正在举办一个著名的庆祝活动，我们要不要去呢
？Exactly. So you've touched on something really good because neighboring means next to. And we're not actually talking about neighboring towns here. We're talking about neighboring countries. So the neighboring countries, I was about to say of Taiwan, but Taiwan doesn't have...
Do we have a neighboring country?
Has neighboring countries and not. Because sometimes when I think of neighboring countries, I think of countries that share a land border.
But we're an island, so...
We could say that Japan is a neighboring country of Taiwan because it is very close. So that could be an example. But if we were going to talk about France, for example, neighboring countries of France include Spain and Germany and Belgium. Those countries are all right next to France. So what has happened in Central Asia is some Afghan people have fled or run away to nearby countries because they think they will be safer there. When we wrote this, just fewer than 40,000 Afghans had crossed the country's border, and most of them went to Iran, Pakistan, and Tajikistan, which are 3 countries which are right next to Afghanistan. When we recorded this, the officials in those countries, the people in the government of those countries, said that the number wasn't too much to handle. But people are a bit worried about what will happen if Afghanistan becomes much more dangerous and loads of people start to leave. I think that's what this sentence is trying to say.
OK, 那接下去呢，我们还要表示是否，可以用从属连接词 whether 来引导名词子句哦，用以表示询问或是怀疑的语气。那该子句可以作为主词、受词或是主词补语。那在这边呢，我们把它当作受词来使用，可以单独使用，或者是搭配 or not 也行哦。大多数的情况下呢，从属连接词 if 它可以与 whether 互相使用。So for example, I'm not certain whether Candice is actually mad at me or not. 代表我不太确定 Candice 是否真的生我的气。
You're not sure if she is or she isn't.Right.
那再来浪潮跟波，我们可以用 wave 这个字。那我们常听到的是新一波或第二波，那就可以用 a new wave of something 或者是 a second wave of something 来表示。
I know what you're going to talk about here.
所以呢，接下来 many countries experienced a second wave of COVID-19 at the end of 2020 代表许多国家在西元2020年底经历了第二波的新冠肺炎。
Exactly. A lot of people were talking about the second wave at the end of last year. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for our discussion today, for our lesson. There is a lot more we can go through with the sentence, but unfortunately that will have to be for another time. So let's go through the 4 sentences again, shall we? An increasing number of students are choosing to study abroad to get a better education. No matter which country you are going to study in, being able to speak English can help you break the language barrier and make more friends. Thousands of citizens fled Afghanistan as the Taliban seized control of the country. This posed a dilemma for neighboring countries, who were worried about whether this would result in a new wave of refugees. All right, that's all from us at English Digest. We hope you've enjoyed today's translation activity, and we'll see you later in the month for one more writing exercise. So, looking forward to that, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.